Welcome to the Naked Under the Table show, where we say what we think because we're just as naked under the table as you are. We've got nothing under the table and nothing is off the table. Our weekly golden nuggets are delivered hot and fresh by your favorite half naked people, Martin, Denise, and Elsie. On this week's episode, we are entering our fourth redux to celebrate our 1 year anniversary month, and we are bringing it back to our very, very first series, or the lack thereof. And tonight, we are going to introduce a new episode, Common Sense, or the lack thereof. And tonight's host with the most is none other than Elsie
Reklamo.
Reclamo.
Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everybody, and welcome again to Nuts. And yes, thank you, Denise, for that amazing intro as always. And we are going to be talking about common sense, which is surprisingly not so common. And a lot of us are definitely susceptible to it. I, for one, have experienced my share of uncommon sense. And I, for one, also am a victim and the appropriator of
Perpetrator.
such.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so so these are things that we can talk about tonight, and hopefully we shed some light into this subject, uh, this very very uncommon subject, which is common sense and the lack thereof. So let's let's delve into it.
We're
I
ready,
want to ask,
man.
you guys are ready, right? Right. Uh, Denise, what is common sense to you?
Why is it me?
Because you're a girl.
Because I'm a goyle. I'm a goyle. I like that. Um, what does common sense mean for me? Admittedly, I know, right? Okay,
Oh,
admittedly, common sense for me is when the person I'm dealing with or speaking with and I share a common understanding of what I consider to be basic things, right? So that we both understand that the earth revolves around the sun, and that there is day and night for a reason, and that extends to things like that's why you don't hold a plug with wet hands, and things like that. But I do realize that the problem with my definition of common sense is and I know we're going to cover this later. It may not be the most forgiving definition of common sense. But I will say, though, that I am aware that common sense and IQ are not the same thing. Because IQ is usually to do with a certain kind of intelligence, not all kinds of intelligence. That's been proven recently that there are multiple intelligences. IQ has been the predominant measure of a kind of intelligence, usually to do with mathematics and language. And in that sense, I know that it's not the same as common sense, because you can have very good sense of common without necessarily being intellectually, you know, superior. There are a lot of people that have brilliant common sense, but they're not necessarily superbly brilliant in the academic sense. So I know
Right,
that.
right. Definitely, definitely, definitely. It's the day to day. It's the day to day. It's the day to day rationality that you have to undergo. I think it's all about living your life daily and having that common knowledge of sorts that makes it easier for you and everyone else around you. How about you, Martin? What do you think is for you? What is common sense?
man, it's yeah. For me, I think it's important to say that common sense is many things and actually works on many actions. Um, so I thought a little bit about it, and I think that the best definition that I could come up with, and this by no means covers all the whole spectrum of common sense or all the axioms, but what I could the best explanation I could come up with was that common sense is the simplest solution to a desired result.
Nice. Nice.
Isn't that Occam's razor though? No, that's the simplest explanation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, the simplest explanation is Occam's razor. Yeah.
So so basically what I build it on, and this is a bit abstract, so but I'll try to explain it, is that basically the way that I see it, all of us, we have an interpretation of the world, right? And through that interpretation of the world, we try to predict the world.
So I was actually thinking in my head, Martin, that common sense might be a general or a shared understanding of cause and effect, right? I think that's
That was
actually,
actually where I
yeah,
was going. Yeah.
yeah, like a general and shared understanding of cause and effect. If you hit something, it's going to topple over, and that's common sense. But then that's also physics, though. So-
And when you dive into it, it comes in many shapes and forms as well, which is why it's an extremely complex concept. That's for sure. But basically, I see it so you have a map of the world which you have analyzed your way to through both conscious and subconscious reflexes, thoughts, patterns, experience, all of this stuff, and you use this map to predict the world. And whenever your prediction in whether this is a complex prediction or a conscious or unconscious prediction, like I'm going to move my hand here and that's where your hand ends, it's not really a conscious prediction, it's just something that you do. But when you go through this map, whenever your interpretation of the world aligns with how the actuality like kind of turns out, so you say, okay, I think this is going to happen, and then that's what happens, that's a solution to a desired result. Now, the way that you get to that solution might not be the simplest, which means that there are many ways to get to the desired result. And common sense for me becomes the simplest solutions across individuals towards a desired result.
yeah,
So
or
that's
the
basically
Nice.
simplest,
A
the
practical,
simplest relation. Yeah,
a practical approach.
yeah, or the simplest relationship between cause and effect.
Is it also common? Do you have common sense? If is it the same thing as when you know a solution, but the easier path escapes you for some reason? Is it still common sense? But you still got to the you still got the solution. You were able to still land on the answer or the path you're aiming for, but it wasn't the easiest. And some other guy shows you an easier way. What does that make you? Do you lack more common sense than the other guy, or is it more of an academic thing? Is it more of a rational thinking issue? What do you think, Martin?
I think that's a great question. But in terms of the of how I described it, then yes, I mean it's a little bit black and white, but technically yes, you would have not have less common sense, but your solution would be less common sense. Like common sense are even things that are so ingrained that
Okay.
it's perceived to be self-evident. Like Denise said, if you push something, it topples over. That's common sense. That's cause and what did you say again?
Right.
What's it called?
Effect, cause and
Cause and
effect.
effect.
Cause and
So, for
effect.
example, common sense is both a concept of time. So it's like these simplest solutions as it's accumulated over time. So it gets to a point where the solution or the relationship between cause and effect becomes self-evident.
And
Um,
I think what we have to be very clear upon
Okay.
here is, I think instead of it being, I would reclassify it. And we had a comment on the live stream that I want to bring up in just a sec, but not self-evident, but shared evident, right? And
hmm,
there's a comment on the live stream from Carlo here, and I'm going to read it really quickly. Wouldn't
it's
common
a good
sense
point.
based on common knowledge, on a standardized education culture or shared experience. And we're definitely going to cover all of that as we go through the show. And I think that's why, that's why there's always a weird shared but personal definition of what common sense is. As Martin says, there's some things that are self-evident, and if it becomes self-evident equally or standardized to everybody, then it becomes common sense. And to Elsie's point, what if it isn't equally evident to everybody? Then does that mean one person's common sense is not another person's common sense, and thereby it isn't common at all? And you go into this whole paradox of.
But that's really a good point, because one of the points that I was thinking about, which actually it doesn't contradict what I said before, but it does add a different level to it. It's the reason why I say the simplest solution to a desired result is because when you talk about accumulated knowledge or a common shared knowledge, it doesn't necessarily. It's not necessarily the simplest solution. So actually, when I think about common sense and I say the simplest solution to a desired result, it's not to be it's not to be misinterpreted as the pathway that most people take. Because
And
you
this
can
is why
have
there's that old adage of common sense is not actually that common, is what they tend to say.
exactly because common sense, especially in the retrospective view, is when you sit there and think about a problem. For example, now we can talk about a problem. It could be anything, but let's be concrete. A problem, you can't find the solution. Once you find the solution or somebody tells it to you, you sit there and you're like, fuck man, that's common sense.
So
Right? It makes sense.
in that regard, okay, in that regard, Martin, do you have, if there's a gauge, right? If common sense is gauged, would you have more common sense if you do if you have a more practical approach to most things? Is that an issue? Is that the case? If someone
A practical
has
a practical
example,
approach compared to what?
Einstein, when he,
Hmm.
yeah, to a more, no, they're both of the same issue that they're trying to solve, let's say, and one
Hmm.
of which comes up with the solution because he has apparently common sense, and another person comes in and says, no, here's an easier way. Does that person have more common sense than the other? Is practicality a good gauge for it?
No, I wouldn't
Yeah,
say, yeah, I
What do you
wouldn't.
guys think?
Sorry, go ahead, Martin, go ahead.
Denise, Martin?
I'm not sure what you mean with practicality. I would say that if you have a problem and you look at two solutions, the simplest solution, if the result is the same, the simplest solution would be the best solution in terms of common sense. But I don't know if that's what you mean with practicality.
I think the
Straight up.
reason why it's
Okay.
not easy to break it down that way also is, I mean,
Well,
let's
yeah.
look at the term
uh,
we're discussing. The term we're discussing uses the word sense. It's not common thoughts, common rationality, common intellect. I mean, the very terminology we're using is common sense. And in that respect, I think it's really how people perceive the world using senses, whether it's sight, sound, touch, etc. And the reason it becomes common is when we share the way we perceive the world and comprehend the world, even if it isn't a problem, just comprehending the world. So, for
Mm,
example, seeing a mug with steam coming out of it is not necessarily a problem, but common sense tells us that that mug will be hot to the touch, you
yeah.
know. And so that's a perception thing, using one of, if not several, of our five senses combined. And I think that's why it's called common sense and not common intellect or common rationality, is because it becomes common when we have a shared perception and an accepted natural course of things that's common to each other because of the five senses. And I think whether or not the solution is more practical or not, if we perceive the same thing. So, for example, using that mug analogy, common sense will tell us it's hot. One person might get a, a piece of cloth to hold the mug so that they don't burn their hand, and another person will just pick up the mug by the handle. Does that mean that the person who used a piece of cloth to shield his hand from the heat has less common sense than the person who had a more practical solution of just holding the mug by the handle? I don't think so. I think they both have common sense, and the solution was just preference. But they both had common sense to know, dude, don't touch that
So what
damn
makes
mug with your bare hands. Yeah.
but
That's a really good point. That's
uh,
a really good
in that
point.
in that
Also, the part
example
of
you gave,
about perceiving.
it's clearly it's a good point. But perception, yeah. But in your example, Denise, clearly the guy who held the cup on its ears has more or less a faster, more practical, and easier solution. Does that make him have? Does he have a higher rationality? Is rationality tied with common sense? What do you guys think?
Well, personally, I don't think so. I think common sense is more based on experience, and less about rationality. In fact, this is where that whole argument about IQ versus common sense comes in, because sometimes we feel that people who have attained a higher education have more common sense than those people that haven't had the privilege of a good education. But I've also been, and we're definitely going to tackle this later, I've also been in situations with people that may not have had the best education, but have a acute common sense, if you know what I mean. Like, they know what works in the world, what's right and wrong, how things function, or like what to avoid. And I think that's really common sense. But this is why, Elsie, I mentioned earlier, like, why there's that old adage that common sense is not common. Because everybody's yardstick for what is common sense is kind of personal, funnily enough, even though it's supposed to be a shared sense. And because it's personal, and because it's each other's yardstick, I guess, or benchmark for what makes common sense generically acceptable, is why it's not actually as common,
It should be
as
common,
we'd
diba?
like.
Hence the word.
Yeah, it should be, but
Mm.
ironically, it isn't, because it's really based on each person's standard for what is basic common sense. You know, and that's the other thing that we haven't used yet, is the word basic. I think when we talk about common sense, for us, but that's basic. Everybody should know that. And the minute to us it's basic knowledge or basic understanding,
We should
then it's
call it. We
common
should start
sense.
call.
What should we start calling it?
We should start calling it personal. We should start calling it personal sense. My personal sense in that matter is blank blank blank. We should start calling it
Yeah,
that,
or,
no?
yeah, or
So
basic
it'll be
sense.
easier. So
Basic.
anyone can have that. Oh no, personal sense. It's gonna be all personal. It's
Everyone
gonna be
can
like
have their
I
own
have my own
sense.
personal sense. Everyone can have their own sense. I say that that book can fly. I don't care what you say. That's my personal sense.
Oh my god, that's
Wouldn't
even
that
more
be
chaotic.
chaotic? Wouldn't that be wouldn't that be a look an awesome chaos? How
It
about you,
would,
Martin?
it would be
What do
utterly
you
chaos.
reckon?
On a flying book on personal sense. Yeah, that well, yeah, that I mean, it's a it's a it's a it's a very complex discussion, because common sense is really not that common, right? Like, and it's very complex, because when you look at it like that, like, if common sense didn't have an underlying framework, however we deem this framework to be, if it didn't have an underlying framework, then it would just be personal sense. People would just run around and they would say, "Oh, but I think this. Oh, but it looks like it's doing this." Yeah, but
Is, isn't that
my personal sense is it
isn't
does
that what's
something
happening now?
different.
You know, you know what's that
Yeah,
called, Martin? You know what's that called?
politics.
Facebook.
Ah, okay.
It's called
It's called
Facebook.
it's called opinions. Opinions. People with opinions.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Monkeys with machine guns are amazing. Anyways, uh, mm, I was gonna ask something I forgot. Anyways, can you humor me? Oh, do we have a comment? I think Denise, would you do the honors?
We actually covered it already. We technically
Oh,
answered.
you did.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
But
okay,
Carlo
okay,
was just
okay, okay,
saying that.
okay.
Yeah, he was talking about the rationale and the logic and the practicality and why it
Right, right,
isn't.
right.
And we jumped into.
Uh-oh.
That's why
But
we use the five senses.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
yeah, but
Uh-oh.
I would say
Can you
that
guys?
that
Oh,
anyway. Yeah, let's just move on. Let's move on.
all right, yeah. Before we move on, I wanna. Can you guys allow me to tell a quick story? And this is a great story that happened centuries ago. I won't mention the characters, and this is a very interesting story. John verse 6-6 to the sixth power. I think that's the verse in the Bible. Anyways, so the story goes, there was a wise man, and the wise man looked at a group of sheep. Right, he saw the shepherd, and he has all the sheep, and he counted the sheep fairly quickly. He goes 500, and he counted all the heads. The wise man counted all the heads, and he goes 500. Now the wise man was a bit of a rascal. He did a lot of pranks, and he saw coming up the road was the stupid man, and he goes, "Oh, this is I'm gonna trip on this guy." And he goes, "Hey, stupid man, how many sheeps do you think there are? Can you count them?" The stupid man looked for a bit and goes, 500. And the wise man goes, "How'd you know that? You're supposed to be stupid." And the stupid man goes, "Oh, that's easy. I counted all the feet and divided it by four."
What?
I'm trying to understand the point of that
Yeah, I'm
story.
also trying to understand the point.
Like what?
Okay, yeah, I'll do it again. The
No,
wise
no,
man
please
looked at the
don't.
sheep,
We
counted
got
the
it. We got
heads,
it.
and said,
We're trying to understand what the point
the
of
the
telling the
point of the
story is.
sto- the point of the story was there was a bit of practicality that's involved in here. And the reason he was stupid, he wasn't unintelligent by any no by any means. It's just that he has a stupid
He took the
approach to it,
longer
to
road.
finding the answer. He took
Yeah.
the
How is that
longer
stupid?
road. I mean, and well, there was a practical, an easier way. And
Okay.
it
Okay. Yeah.
goes. These are things that happen. I don't know, in my case, in my opinion, my humble opinion, this happens every day as I go out. Well, not as much as before, but back in the day when we are all allowed to be going out, we would go out, and it happens every day. You see something that's gonna be so easy to fix, but some idiot is just doing it the wrong way, or he's probably gonna fix that. It's just you know what I'm talking about. Not to stretch too much. Let's go on. But
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite parables. I don't even know it's a parable. Anyways, anyways, I want to know, what did Carlos say? I'm the long way. Some people are the long way. Uh, anyways, I want to know. I want to know some examples. Let's go to the let's to the lighter side of things. Give me an example or some examples of situations or people that you've encountered that are just, in your opinion, it's just, wow, this guy's just lacking common sense, or that person's just lacking common sense. Can you tell me a brief, a short story on that. Anyone can go. Anyone can go.
Yeah,
Anyone can go first.
I have a story. Um, so I was working with this guy. Well, I wasn't directly working with him, but we happened to be in each other's proximity from time to time. And there was a project in one of the bars where we needed to put some heavy duty wheels under the DJ table, the table that has the DJ's booth, so we could move it around easily because it was a very heavy table. And I got in there, and the guy was sitting. And this is by the way, this is an engineer actually. He was sitting, had the table tipped up, so the legs were out, and was sitting with the heavy duty wheel, a screw, and a screwdriver. Every single wheel needed 4 screws, right? And this is a hardwood table. So he was screwing in these screws by hand in a hardwood table, prolonging the time of the task from 5 minutes to probably more than an hour.
You so sure he was lacking common sense? Was he sorry, Martin? Was he getting paid by hour? If he was getting paid by hour, he was probably a smart guy prolonging that.
But he wasn't an hourly paid guy. But that's a good point.
That's a problem. That's the problem.
And also, yeah, what does it help to be paid by the hour like that? Like, would it be common sense if you lose your job? Like, anyway, right?
That's right.
So he was sitting there, and I talked to him, and I asked him why he was doing it like that, and he just didn't really give an answer. So I eventually got him went and got the electrical screwdriver, of course, and drilled a couple of screws like a wheel into the table, left it there with him, got back half an hour later, and he was still screwing these screws into the table by hand with the electrical screwdriver lying next to him. And that's probably I have a lot of uncommon sense stories, but that's probably one of them where I was just like, okay, can't win. Just, okay.
Maybe he's afraid of electricity. Maybe he has a deadly allergy to electricity.
Yeah, those lithium batteries, man.
I'm just trying to figure it out, man. Yeah, that can be deadly, dude.
It can.
How about you, Denise? Do you have a juicy story for us?
Several, in fact, that generally revolve around air travel. Let's give a round of applause for travelers that lack common sense. From the people who keep trying to fit a piece of luggage that is yay big on the overhead bin, to another person who is lining up to get their boarding pass at the check-in counter and have decided to pack their passport, their ticket, or their printed ticket, or whatever other documentation it is they need at the very bottom of their hand carry luggage that they need to open up in the middle of the line of check-in just to get at this documentation, right? Or my personal favorite, when you are actually on the airplane, right? When you are actually on the airplane, the moron during meal times that decides he needs to get up to go to the loo and realizes that when you move your tray up, everything goes flying off the tray. I have seen that more than once.
Like, they just sit next to one.
Thank goodness, no. But one was literally right across the aisle, and my shoe got wet.
This really happened?
Seriously, like they don't realize, right? Or another version is they don't have to go to the toilet, but the girl who decides to cross her legs, Like she's sitting with both her legs down and she decides to cross her legs while having this meal. And the tray is down and there's food and beverage on this tray. And she decides to cross her legs. And of course, honey, it's a finite space, honey, and yeah. I tell you, airline travel, I swear to
Uh,
God, is the best place.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Airline travel is definitely the airport is a good place
Yeah.
for those
If
kinds
you
of
want to do an
experiences.
anthropological study on common sense or the lack thereof, hang out in an airport, guys. Just freaking hang out in an airport. You will see one every 10 minutes.
you can write a lot of jokes in the airport.
Yep.
That's definitely one. That's definitely one. That was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have more?
No, I think I've lambasted our human race quite enough. So, guys, when you fly, just try to be a little bit more practical,
Okay.
or not practical, just you know, think about how things work, cause and effect, use your eyes, your ears,
Mm,
your sense of touch.
okay. My experience, I have a couple. Actually,
Ah.
I think I have an experience on that every day. I think every day of my daily life, I think there's some encounter that I go through. When I go out, every time I go out, there's just someone there that's just gonna boggle you, and you just want to shoot yourself in the head. It's crazy. There was one time. This is all true. This was one time. I was at the ATM, no, lining up like everybody else, and I hate queues. I really, really hate it. Anyways, I'm lining up, and the line was moving so slow for some reason. I think Pinoys have two of Pinoy's favorite pastimes is boxing or billiards. It's sports and lining up. I think those are our two favorite
No.
pastimes. Anyways, so they were lined up in the ATM. We were all lined up, and the line in front of me did it is not moving, and but the girl in front of me just happens to move a little, but the line didn't move. The queue stayed the same. She just moved a little bit in front of me, and the guy in my back who clearly sees the line. We were just like around 5 people, so it's a you can clearly see it. But the girl just moved a little bit away from me. The line didn't change. There's still like I think around 2 people in front of us. The guy in behind me goes, "Can you please move? The line moved." And I go, "Sir, the line did not move. She just moved away from me, which I want to keep space between us. It did not move." And the guy goes, "Sir, I'll be late for work. Please move." Sir, the line did not move. People did not move. That old lady in the ATM is still
It's
withdrawing,
still
trying to
there.
figure out her pin. It did not move. Y- yes, yes, sir, I know. And he goes, I'm not kidding. This really happened. Honest to God. And he goes, yes, I see that. She is figuring it out. I see that. But please move because I'll be late. My God, I'm having a headache. I was having a migraine. And that really happened, guys. That really happened. And that's just one. I have 100 more. We're gonna lose time if I tell you all. If I start
That's a good
giving
one.
all my story, telling my stories. It's just crazy. There. Okay.
Definitely.
One short one. And this happened a few months ago. A few months ago, after the storm. There was a storm in my village, and a neighbor of mine was sweeping uh, leaves and trash to the gutter, to the drainage, inside the drainage. So I go, what the hell are you doing? It's gonna get clogged. It's gonna get filthy and clogged, and we'll get flooded. And he goes, that's why I'm sweeping it to clean it. But you're clogging the drainage. That's why I'm cleaning different planes of existence, guys. And this guy is not even a poor guy. He looks like he's a student of some kind. I don't know where he's come, but I kid you not, that it really happened. This guy was just trying to prove a point that he was cleaning the streets by placing all the trash to the drainage. And I go, you can't do that because it's gonna clog. It'll come back to us. That's why I'm cleaning. It
What
was
goes around
useless.
comes
At
around,
that
bro.
point, I
What
gave
goes
up. I was
around
like,
comes
okay,
around.
this is useless. This is useless. And I'm telling you guys, I think the reason well, we have floods. One of the biggest reason is trash. And now I see why. If
Yeah, yeah.
that's your common man with supposedly common sense, we're screwed. We're in trouble. Oh my god. Anyways, let's reverse the situation. Can you give me an example, a situation where you were the culprit of our topic, where you were the one who was lacking in a sense of common during that time, at that point in
Yeah.
your life? Can you cite an example?
Um, this weekend, um, I had two things. I had one thing today, and I had one earlier, yesterday. So basically, I yesterday it was I had a like an exam prep. I have an exam in like 2 weeks, and one of my teachers had like didn't show up for the actual scheduled exam prep, so he canceled it and rescheduled it on a Sunday. And I was like, man, it's common sense not to schedule shit on a Sunday. Then today, it's a holiday, and I went to the supermarket to buy myself an ice cream, and I'm like, man, it was closed. So I'm like, what? Why? It's not why. It's common sense. Like, why is a supermarket not open when everything else is closed on a holiday? Like, everybody's at home. They can go out, do groceries, right? Closed. And the common sense part is that first, I argue, why would anyone put work on a holiday? And then the day after, because my circumstances change, I argue, hey, why are these guys not working on a holiday? Because I need them to be there. And that's a lack of common sense. It's definitely subjective
That
common
is
sense on my
that is
part.
one. It happens still, man. It still happens to the best of us, my friend. We are not free from that. We are not immune to it. Definitely not. How about you, Denise?
This never happens to me. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Um,
Wow.
no,
Come
I'm trying to pick
on.
the funniest one. I'm trying to
Come on,
pick the
common sense.
I'm trying to pick the funniest one. Um, okay, this was when I was a lot younger, right? And but I don't know if this is really common sense, lack of common sense, or lack of common knowledge, though,
Which
which
is
is
like
two
5 years ago.
yeah, no, but like I was like, thank you for that, by the way. I was complaining why my coffee wasn't making helping me wake up. And some person takes a look at my order and he goes, well, because you're an idiot who ordered decaf. Why the hell did you order decaf if you want to wake up? But see, at the time, I was new to coffee. I was in my college years. I didn't know.
Oh,
So okay, maybe that's not so much common sense to common knowledge. So okay, I will give one that really makes me
you were a
stupid.
kid. Come on, you can give yourself a break on that.
No
So
breaks given.
okay, I women when we go to formal things, right? A wedding, a whatever, where you have to wear a cocktail dress or even a gown. Some of this stuff comes with a lot of buttons and ribbons and ties and stuff, right? So when I was younger, I was very skinny and sometimes dresses, especially the kinds that were a bustier that didn't have a strap, would be very conscious that they would slide down, right? And this was one where it was a bustier that you would tie, right? And you tied it all the way down to, and there was a tie that went anyway. The point being is, I decided to double knot all of those things just to make sure that they didn't come loose. Because if they were a regular ribbon, they'd all, in my head, they're all gonna come loose. So I'm
They
gonna
must
double
have. They
knot.
must have looked amazing, man. They must have
I'm
looked
gonna double
amazing.
knot them, including the parts that cover my privates. So when I got drunk and needed to
Oh,
pee, let's just say that was the most arduous time in a toilet I've ever had. Like ever. Like,
yeah,
oh.
just standing there.
And I'm hopping up and down because I really have to pee. So it's not helping with the logistical problem of trying to unknot 3 or 4 different ribbons.
Talking about
Yeah.
the gowns, right? Talking about the gowns. So this is just a side question, right? But I always wondered, like, do women sometimes forget some of the gown in the toilet? Like, if like you have to lift it up, right? But if it's a big gown, I'm like, maybe you didn't lift it up properly, and you sit down and start peeing, and some of the gown is like
Never.
hanging in the toilet. That never
Never happens
happens.
to a girl. We have a trick where we hike up the thing over our whole heads. So it's like this. Yeah, that's what we do.
And that's why girls pee behind a closed door.
Exactly. It's not a pretty thing to look at. We need to maintain the image there, guys. But and that's also why I love this conversation. Is
Common sense.
it's that sometimes common sense flies out the window because you're so focused on something else. You're so focused on something that your common sense just
Could be.
it has exited the
Could be.
building.
There's. You're right. You're right. You're right. Yeah, you can blame a lot. Well, it doesn't excuse the fact that you did uncommonly stupid or commonly stupid. But you're right, Denise. The fact being that there are things that you're uncontrollable that bothered you at that point, and because of that, made you do something stupid. And that's pretty understandable. It happens to everybody. Happens to the greatest people. Happens to presidents, leaders, generals, which we'll talk about later. Which I want to know what you guys think of that. My story was a few days ago. This is very recent. This is like on a Tuesday. uh, I went out. It was such a hot day. I've been driving for God knows how long, more than 20 years of my life. So it's instinctive for me to start
How
the
can you
car.
have
My
driving
cars are
cars for
all
longer than you
manual,
live?
right?
I don't.
Thank you.
There's some
Well, I've been
inconsistencies
driving since I was 5 years old,
in your
Martin.
age story, bro.
Not really, not really. I learned how to drive when I was 5, so
And
the
ladies and
timeline fits.
gentlemen,
Anyways,
Martin just exercised common sense.
be nice. Okay, so I was parked right in front of another car, my brother's car, and it was pretty close. And stupid me, I don't know why I did this. Up to this day, I'm kicking myself in the butt trying to figure out how I could do something that stupid. And I forgot to put my transmission on neutral. It was on drive. That means when you start the car on drive, it'll instantly move. So that's what happened. So I hit the ignition, and the car instantly moved and hit my brother's car and wrecked the front. This was on a
Ah,
Tuesday, just a
but
few days ago. So
it was your brother's car that
last
got
week,
wrecked, right?
that was pretty stupid. And my God, yep, for the life of me, guys, I don't know how.
Yeah, man.
Right, my brother's car.
Don't you love how sometimes though there are really these factors that affect common sense? Alcohol for one is a natural common sense inhibitor. Every time you're on alcohol, your common sense just flies out the window. Or I think I saw a comment on the live stream earlier. When you're in love, sometimes
Yeah, I was
common
about.
sense. Just,
Yeah, man. Yeah, I saw that one too. Like we all lose common sense when it comes to relationships. For sure, man. For sure. Like yeah.
and
But
and
I
and so
think,
I
but to be honest, relationships, like now we're not supposed to talk about, like it's not supposed to be about relationships, but since we brought it up, I think that relationships are also a lot about that. Like there is a commitment to do something, to hold on to a person or to be with a person despite what common sense might tell you, or to do something for a person despite knowing that it might not end well, or that it might not be the best solution, right? So I guess there's really like a built-in part in relationships, like a commitment beyond what is rational, or beyond what is sensible.
and it's funny that
So
you mentioned that because it's actually neurological. There are certain sections of the brain that control what we like to predominantly call common sense. And when certain other napses in the brain are either triggered or are diminished,
is
they're,
it?
they're
Are
not
you talking
firing
about the
properly.
second brain?
If you're if there's certain functionalities in the brain that actually prohibit common sense. So something as simple as the fight or flight response, actually when it releases the cortisol and the adrenaline, it actually diminishes your ability to have common sense. So that's why sometimes when you're on high alert, there's a rustling in the trees or a movement in the bushes, and you're imagining the worst already. And you're like, oh, there's a burglar, or there's a tiger, or there's something. And that's definitely not common sense, because if you were more rational, if you didn't have all of those cortisol and all of that adrenaline firing, common sense would tell you, dude, it's the wind, or dude, it's your cat, or something to that effect. But when you're on high alert, your neurological response is actually designed to fight what is commonly known as common sense in order to survive, in order to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And I
I mean,
think
it
the same
literally
happens
just
with
shuts down
relationships.
that part of your brain, right? Like when you do have the fight and flight, it's a big part of your brain function that it just cortisol just shuts it down.
Exactly. And I think in relationships, it goes the opposite way. You're not firing adrenaline, you're not firing cortisol or any of those things, but certain um, synapses in the brain actually diminish your ability to think clearly or with common sense. And that's why when you're in a relationship, especially when you're new to a relationship, many of the things that you do and say do not seem very common sense to people who are watching it from an external point of view. And it's very neurological actually. And it's very, very interesting in that sense.
Very
What about
interesting.
you,
That's
Elsie? Common sense and
the scientific
relationships.
approach to. It's interesting. Uh, I guess I think relationships can go. A lot of that has instinct to do with it. A lot of that has biological instinct to do with it. If we're gonna look at it in a more scientific way, uh, chemistry plays a big part. Pheromones play a big part. But in relationships, in attraction, but in relationships as trying to navigate or fix or live through a relationship, that I guess that takes some common sense, rationality, a lot of patience and maturity can go a long way, I guess. Sacrifice, all of that, I guess, has to accumulate to everything
And
that makes you
sacrifice in general can go against
happy.
common
But it's
sense.
something that we can talk about.
That's true too, Marks. Yeah. Or
Can
not
it
even
can
sacrifice,
it can go
generosity,
against common sense.
charity, kindness. A lot of that actually goes against common sense, which is also why, to a certain degree, and we haven't really covered
Against
this,
common sense
but
or against instinct?
no, against common sense. Like for example, scammers, for example. Obviously, there are a lot of very complex, intricate,
Mm.
sophisticated scams out there, and the human race is
And
so
they're all
unkind.
from India. They all call from
No,
India.
no, 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 no. We're not calling out particular countries, but you know,
I'm calling out
Give
Microsoft's
give me
customer
one.
service that call me and
Give me
ask for
one.
my.
Denise, give me one scam. Give me one.
no, but so it doesn't really matter what the scam is. It's just fascinating to me how humans are so quick to
Why do
victim
you hear a
shame.
cow in the background?
Or they're so quick to victim shame because they're like, "Oh, I can't believe you fell for that scam." That's like common sense. Like it's so obvious it was a scam, And for the more intricate and sophisticated
Mm.
scams, then the victim can defend themselves, or there's a little bit of a defense generally. But admittedly, there are scams that are way more simple in nature, like a scam that you won $1 million, and in order to claim
Mm.
your $1 million, you have to give me $500 first. For many people, that's common sense, and they will be like, guys, come on, it's so obviously a scam.
Right.
First of all, you enter into any kind of competition where you would be eligible to win money to begin with, and so on and so forth. And they victim shame these people, and they say they didn't have common sense, and that's why they fell victim to a scam. And this is where I feel common sense takes a dark turn, where we now use common sense as a righteous
Hmm.
accusatory tool. We now get to dictate why either we are better, smarter, safer than anybody else because we have common sense that other people don't have. And that becomes a little bit of a problem for me. Well, not even a little, a lot of a problem for me, because who said these things were supposed to be known by everybody? There's a reason why people like scammers pick their victims the way they do, or the way manipulators and psychopaths or any kind of abusive person picks their victims the way they do, is because not
And why
because
they
these victims,
succeed.
and why they succeed. And it has very little to do with common sense. It has more to do with insecurities, natural fears, that they're gullible. But exactly, if you're gullible, does that mean you don't have common sense? I don't think so.
But I think that's also it's a good it's a good example to give, Denise. And this adds to the complexity of common sense, because and common sense is easy when you know the answer, right? It's like with anything complex that you're trying to solve. And this is what I talked about, like not I talked about, but this is what I was trying to get at earlier. It's that it's easy to insinuate that you have common sense, or to insinuate common sense when you know the answer, right? So common sense is usually a framework that you use to navigate around the world, but it's a low what's it called, load like when you have with
Crap.
pixels and shit, low resolution framework. It's a low
Hashtag
it's a
low.
low resolution framework. So it's a way
Yeah,
for you to navigate around the world without completely understanding what's going on. So when it comes to these kind of things, when you have these small things, like you, it's much easier to proclaim common sense when you already know the answer. Like, but if you don't know the answer, if you don't know the specific that's with scammers, you don't know the specific cues to look for when people call you and all of that, then it's much more complex. It's much more complex because you're engaging in a problem that you don't know the solution to. And for you to proclaim dominance in terms of common sense, and the problem is that a lot of people tend to do it without building it only on the fact that they knew the answer already.
exactly. And so it becomes this
They
weird
don't they
version
don't
of
know
it
they
becomes
don't
this
know the
weird version of
complexity. Yeah, sorry.
superiority complex. People use or throw around the word common sense as a means to feel superior to other people. And common sense is not a superiority game. That's why it's called common. It's not that one person is better than the other because they have common sense and the other doesn't, right? But then why call it common sense to begin with?
Yeah, that's a good point. For me, it's just my point was just that the people do use it as a superiority thing. I think it's an important point to remember when, in terms of dealing, also when you deal with yourself, is that if you know the answer, like I sit and I do fucking school exercises all day, right? And I sit there and I look at this fucking shit I sit here and look at this stuff for 10, 15 minutes, and I'm like, man, what the fuck is what's going on? I have no idea what they're
And you
talking
can't
about.
pick it up. Yeah.
I look at the answer and I'm like, man, that's I knew that. I knew that, but I didn't know it because the complexity of my knowledge pertaining to this specific thing, and you can use this in common sense as well, was not deep enough to put the pieces of the puzzle together on my own. But once you know the answer, it's easy to proclaim, that's
Common
common knowledge,
sense.
or that
Exactly.
makes sense, you know. And a good way to know if you actually know something is if you are able to put the pieces together yourself. If you're not able to put the pieces together yourself, um, yeah, it's not
And it
common
goes
knowledge for
so
you. Common
so this is
sense
the
for you.
question I have. I'm going to jump in with a question of my own here. So
So
evidently
it's
we've established evidently we've established that common sense isn't in fact common. I mean, we'd like it to be, but it isn't. And it has a lot of, as Martin said at the start, a lot of axioms to it, a lot of context and contributions to it. And since it isn't common and it's evidently not a standard way of thinking, then why is there this shared expectation to begin with that everybody should have common sense in the first place? Like, why is there a shared? Wow, look at our producer, like super fast on the uptake there. Yeah.
I think it should go. I think it should be. I think we should. It should be more on the commonality of a lot of things. Like your credit or your ATM card goes to that slot. You know that in that minuscule sense that it has to be that primitive to be considered something that's okay. That's considered common sense. But if it's if it's a passing of information that makes someone feel more superior than the other, that I think that's a different thing. I think you shouldn't call it common sense. That's already an information. But yeah, it's a case to case basis. It's pretty demographic plays a big part. Economics play a big part in this in that situation when you think about things in that scenario. So yeah,
So why do you think then
I don't
if
think
so
that
many things
we should be discriminating people that fast.
so that's why I'm saying. So I agree with you. We shouldn't discriminate on people. And evidently information and education is one of the ways that quote unquote common sense gets built. So with knowing that not everybody has access to the same type or amount of information or the same type or amount of education, why do we keep demanding that common sense be a shared thing, that everybody should have it? And this becomes an anomaly for me. Maybe we should start a movement to eradicate the expectation for common sense to exist at all.
But don't you think that's because common sense, in the way that we're addressing it right now, as in everybody should have common sense, is a very generalized description of something extremely complex and extremely with great variety, right? Because common sense depends on like there are like it can be anything, right? From don't have your feet on the table, right? Which is a very general thing that you could probably expect from anyone. But common sense can also pertain to complex, not complex, but complexer issues, such as and knowledge specific issues like math, right? Like you have a solution on a math problem. It's like, that's common sense, right? 2 plus 2 is 4. That's common sense. So I think it also depends, but of course, it's not fair to assume that someone
Yeah,
know something, like it's not fair to assume that they know something. Like if they acted out wrongly and you think there's something wrong with that and they don't have common sense, and I mean try to explain it, or just whatever, just leave them be and let them go on with their life. And
I think the reason there's this shared expectation for common
Right.
sense is it's not like human beings have a it's not like you come into the world and there's a code of conduct handed to you. When you join an organization or a company, there's usually a code of conduct. How we act and how we behave, how we speak, etc. Most Facebook pages these days and any kind of social media or internet group, when you join Reddit and subreddits, there's usually a code of conduct, etc. I think common sense is actually in place today because it is an unsaid shared code of conduct amongst human beings. So to your point, that code of conduct can be in terms of etiquette, like you don't put your feet on the table. It could be a code of conduct as to how we approach problems and situations like basic math, or it could be a code of conduct in terms of, you know, how we're supposed to perceive the world. And everybody is supposed to have a shared understanding so that we all, at least on some level, can expect certain behavior, words, or responses from people. And maybe that's why we have this expectation for common sense, because life doesn't come with a manual. And common sense essentially is our working manual for dealing with life and dealing with other human beings.
yeah, exactly, and it functions as a low resolution map that
Yeah.
you can use to navigate around the world without getting into major unnecessary conflicts with other people or with the world in general. If it's not with people, then it's with stuff that you're doing, like encounter unnecessary problems in general. um but of course it's also a very broad spectrum, right? And you can't be all over the spectrum at the same time. It's just not possible. So of course there will be uh,
Right.
clashes of common sense. Something can be common sense to one person, but to another person, it's just not.
Right. 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 Definitely. Tama. Tama. Definitely. Okay. Can I ask you guys? I want to know. Can you name me a company, a government faction, or a world leader that you feel or you think is lacking in common sense? Or you can name three of them. Name a company, a government faction, and a world leader. If it all depends on you, or if we have time. Martin, well, I want to know what your thoughts on this are.
I really had a hard time with this one because I had a hard time with this one because I think in most situations there are sense to it and there's nonsense to it. So a person, like I think it would be too easy to just
Mm.
pick, like, say Donald
But for
Trump,
you,
and
this
then
is This is personal.
for me,
Why? What
if
did
we're
he do
talking about,
for you personally? What makes you think that he was?
no, but I actually don't, I wouldn't use him, but I
I'm
would.
loving the slight delay on Elsie's side because it's making the conversation super interesting. It's like
um a company, or
It's making
I
what?
would probably say, like, the best example I can get is no, man, I to be honest, I'm blank. I don't know what to say right now. Maybe Denise can go first, and I'll see if I can come up with something.
Sige. We'll
yeah.
get back to you. Maybe something will pop in your head when we start talking. How about you, Denise? Give me one. A government faction, a world leader, or maybe a company.
So I
Personal,
definitely
personally. This is for you.
I get,
It's
yeah.
just stupid.
So I get Martin's struggle with this question. Only because after everything we've just discussed, who are we or who am I to start calling out somebody for not having common sense? Because evidently it does have its gradiences, it does have
Yeah.
nuances, and arriving at it as common as we'd like to think,
Okay.
is a little
Okay.
bit delicate. But I
Okay.
will take a gander. I will take a gander. Um,
Okay.
I think,
Don't you have any? Don't you have any? Okay.
yep, I do. I
A
do.
complaint.
Um,
A complaint that you have for a company or
yes.
a certain.
So at the risk of Elsie jumping in, I will answer the question. So I wouldn't necessarily call out specific people, but I would like to call out specific behavior. And I think that's, for me, a better way to answer the question, if you don't mind. So one of the things that I find is lacking in common sense is this unabashed freedom we have all taken to say whatever it is we want to say on the internet. Recently, Chrissy Teigen has come under fire because 10 years ago, when she was in her 20s, she was apparently bullying somebody who was in her teens and not even old enough in terms of being considered a adult. She was a minor. And I'm not going to jump in as to who I think is wrong here, but the common sense mistake here is, honey, be careful what you say on the internet. Not only is everybody going to be able to read it, it's there forever. So you can't use just random things and words that I'm not going to repeat, because they were, some of the ones that she used were just unbelievably inappropriate, that I'm just like, there was a lack of common sense there, because you don't do that on the internet. So that's definitely one. Like, one of the behaviors I see where people lack common sense is, filter yourselves online, people. Filter yourselves online. Everybody's going to see it. And even if you try to delete it, it's going to be found later. The other behavior that I feel
Do you think
is,
they will ever find my teenage nude photos?
yes, they will. And now that you've announced it to the world,
That's my
everybody's going
that's
to be
my that's my
searching.
presidency that went straight out the window there, man. Damn it. Political career gone.
There you go. So that's definitely one. I think another behavior that I feel is happening today that sorely lacks in common sense is when you fight for a movement, right? A lot of people like to back movements today, call it the woke culture, call it the globalization of the world, and we're all part of similar things. But there are certain movements that catch fire, and there are people that join those movements and start riding on that proverbial bandwagon. And when you read some of the things they write, it's just like, no, honey, no. And again, in that moment, in that heat of the moment, common sense was out the window. And when they look back at it, it's like, oh, damn, maybe I shouldn't have done that or said that. Or maybe, and again, I'm all for supporting advocacies, I'm all for joining movements. But again, have a little common sense as to which ones you're joining, why you're joining, what you're doing about it, because that can come back to bite you in the ass. And I guess the last behavior that I feel is lacking in common sense, and this is closer to companies and government factions and world leaders, is when they start making promises that's for the quote unquote greater good. That is a big common sense problem. You never make a promise, a sweeping generalization, that what you are embarking on or what you are doing is for the greater good. Because no matter how much research you have, how well you know your employees, your customers, your constituents, there is no such thing really as the greater good. Everybody's going to have an opinion, and some of those opinions are going to be contradictory to this grand, seemingly altruistic plan of yours.
That's a
So
very
have
libertarian point. I like
So
it.
be careful, guys.
Mhm.
Don't give sweeping general statements about how you are doing so much for humanity, because humanity be broad and diverse, guys.
But I
And that
think
is
that
common sense.
that really ties up with the point you had before about the internet and not per se, or well, per se the advocacies. It's sort your try to sort yourself out before you go out into the world and try to sort that one out.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, yeah, a lot of common
Some
Right.
sense.
countries are canceling vaccines for everybody, but they didn't bother to ask the people because some people might not have minded if that vaccine was still available, but some people in the government decided, no,
That was exactly what happened here.
no,
And if I was to say something, I would say the whole. But there's just common and uncommon sense everywhere, every day, right? But definitely the COVID pandemic has been a display of solutions that have worked, but it's also been a display of a lot of solutions that just doesn't make any sense. And for example, in Denmark, and this is just my own opinion. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a vaccine expert or whatnot, but they stopped they basically said no to two vaccines, right? So they banned those two vaccines in Denmark. The government banned it, so nobody can get it without asking. What if I was willing to take the risk,
exactly, exactly.
right?
They didn't ask. They just made a unilateral decision that was supposed to be for the greater good. You can ask people. One of the biggest ways to not fall into the nonsensical part of common sense, ask. Ask. How hard is it to take a poll? How many of you would still be willing to take this given the general medical advice that it might not be safe? I mean, it's not hard to ask. Ugh.
What about you, Elsie?
Right. 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 Ma- Well, this is my personal opinion on it, and you guys can justify it if you want. But I think this is really utterly stupid, nonsensical at all for me. Okay, a few years back, this is before the pandemic, and we all know that the Philippines, Manila, Metro Manila, especially, has a very healthy and vibrant traffic system. We all know that. Very healthy, uh, impactful traffic, and we undergo traffic every day. All of us did back in back a few years when 3 hours going to Makati and whatnot. Now, our great land transportation division, our government land transportation office, has decided to ban stuff that would supposedly cause accidents, which I totally agree. In some of what they did, they banned ornaments on the dashboard. Right, that's okay. That can actually lead to some. That's great. Okay, on. But they banned one thing that made me scratch my head. I would understand if they banned this if it was an open road and if you're driving fast. But this is like, remember, this is traffic that goes like that. They banned coffee. They banned drinking coffee in your car, and that's an actual rule. They enforced it for a few days, just for a few days. They tried to
Yeah,
enforce it, then they just
they must have
probably
made a
figured
lot
out
of money, man.
that kind of made a lot of people scratch their heads. And to a point, I can remember because I tried it. Some fast food joints were not allowed to sell you coffee in the drive-through, but they can sell you juice or soft drinks or whatever, but not coffee
Do you remember that time that they banned
because
the
it's not
sale of
allowed
hammers?
according to LTO.
They
Right,
banned the sale
right.
of
Oh,
hammers
here's
in
another
hardware
thing that's
stores
really
because there was a gang that would use
right.
hammers to
Yeah,
break
that.
into.
Oh, what do you call that, Denise? What do you call that, Denise? That was amazing. That's gold. You can't make that up. That's just nonsensical, uncommon sense. That's common sense gold. A
That
guy
lasted
breaks
about a
in
week.
a jewelry store with a hammer, so they banned all sales of hammers. Slow clap.
Yeah,
Slow
so
clap. Here's another thing.
that's
Just a few months ago, they they enforced having a toddler car seat in the enforced. It's mandatory if your child is 12 years old below, he has to sit in the child seat. Most kids at 12 or 11 are like probably as tall as me already, and they would be like sitting in a car seat. That was pretty funny. That was a pretty funny rule. There's
Yeah,
so much.
no,
LTO alone, it's already it's a collection of idiocracies. Amazing.
yeah,
How
but
about in this country? I
rules
don't know if
really
you've
tend
seen
to
it.
be arbitrary,
That
man.
when
Like it's incredible. Like
right, right,
so many
right.
good
But sometimes
stories about
you can
rules
one can argue that
implemented.
it's probably making sense.
Just not in the
Right,
real
right,
world, you
right,
know.
right.
Just not
Especially
common
in
sense.
it's not that common. Not that common. I mean, when you think about destructive stupidity, you can go to, my gosh, religion takes the cake, I think. Religion takes the cake for me. I think Spanish Inquisition alone, I don't know. That's another topic to talk about. That's a whole different ball game. Anyways, guys, this has been a great show. I want to know your final words on it, on our topic, and I want to also know your thoughts on it. Are we progressing? Are we actually getting smarter? Is the world gonna be saved by the next generation, who supposedly or has to be smarter than us? What do you guys think?
Who goes first? Me? All right, all right, all
Anyone,
right, all
anyone?
right,
Yeah,
all
okay,
right.
Martin, go ahead. Go for it,
Ladies
man.
first, so I'll take it. Um, well, that was quite a question. Like, but to go to talk about whether we have more common sense, um, are we progressing to a higher level of common sense? I think, or are we regressing in common sense? In terms of that question, I think that I think common sense evolves over time, right? Because there is common sense of a guy in a hunter gathering village knowing not to go out on his own at night because he's probably not going to make it home alive. And there's common knowledge of a 21st century person, which arguably is a lot more complex because our society is a lot more complex. There's a lot more relations, interpersonal relations, and a lot of more things to take into account. Although not as much of the things to take into account are lethal. A lot of them are, like for example, if we talk about common sense in traffic, right? Um, but so yeah, I do think that we continuously progress. Like the complexity of common sense progresses because our society becomes more complex. So the way that we interpret it in a way that we understand has to evolve with it. So in that case it evolves to me, yes. If but to answer your question, if we are getting smarter, I think we have more knowledge available to us. I think we do have, as I said, like the complexity of our common knowledge, or the way that we navigate and perceive the world is more complex now today than it was, but also because there's a need for it to be more complex. I don't believe that the human being as a biological being is better at solving problems. Like most of the stuff that we like, this common sense is built upon accumulated knowledge which has come through time. So in that case, yeah, it is more complex today. I don't see it regressing, but I don't feel like the people, like, am I smarter than Aristotle's, right? Like I can't really answer that question. Of course I am, but
You can be. You can be.
um in terms of like the next generation being able to being smarter, they, of course they will be. Like, we're still accumulating knowledge every day, and the next generation will be smarter, and they will have different problems. My generation will be smarter and will have different problems that we need to solve, just like the generation after me will have other problems, and hopefully we'll can continue to solve those problems as society evolves. so yeah, all in all, I believe, I don't believe that we as biological beings are getting smarter, but the knowledge that we possess, not both on a collective level but also on an individual level, is definitely getting more complex. So yeah, yeah, that's it.
I'm
Nice.
gonna
Well
follow.
said. How about you, Denise? What do you think?
I'm gonna follow what Martin said and build on that because I do agree that given the way the world has evolved, the amount of information, knowledge, education is so much more, at least generally speaking, attainable for people. So I would say that our ability to develop more common sense, if there's such a thing, or better common sense, is definitely here and it's definitely plausible. My fear is not so much in whether or not we're progressing forward in common sense, but more if we're applying it, because it's a double-edged sword. Technology and innovation allows us more access to information and knowledge, but it tends to also make us lazier. Less people think nowadays or take a step back to analyze a situation, and it doesn't even require hard analysis for an hour and a half. Simple things like an email you get in your inbox would, a long time ago, if you get a letter in the mail, you're wondering where that came from, and there's an immediate trigger for common sense to tell you, if you don't know who this letter's from, don't open it. But in our world today, we open every bloody email in the inbox without giving it a second thought because of the speed of the click of a button and because technology thinks on behalf of us most of the time already.
Open them, but just don't answer them.
But my point is, why even? I mean, if it's from a source you don't know and the subject is a little bit funny, and we can argue the nuances and the mnemonics that could trigger us to have more common sense, but that's where I'm actually going with this. What good is what you said, Martin? What good is our ability to develop a better sense of common if we're not applying that when and how we should? And to me, that's the bigger danger than losing common sense or lacking common sense, is lacking the ability and the fortitude to use it whenever it's warranted.
Yeah, I think a lot of the usage also comes from necessity, right? Um, so whenever it is necessary for you to use it, you will to the extent that you can. But if it's not necessary, then you might not deploy it, right? I think
And that's
necessity
what scares
drives it a
me, is
lot.
that people are now, exactly, the necessity to use common sense is the one that's regressing, you know. So
Yeah.
Elsie, what about you? Do you think we're, I mean, I'd like to hear the answer to your own question here.
To some extent, yeah, I have high hopes. I think we have I think we're bound to fulfill a lot of milestones. I think this decade, maybe, hopefully this decade. One of which is congratulations. I want to shout out congratulations to Alyssa Carson. This woman, this girl, might be the first person on Mars, so to land on Mars. So she'll the Mars will be terraformed by a lady. So it will be a woman's world.
By a
I'm just kidding.
human,
Anyways,
yeah.
I was kidding.
You know, that's funny.
Anyways,
Like,
so
yeah, we can discuss that. You know, maybe we should have a feminism conversation because there are a lot of feminists that aren't actually feminists. Feminism is not about calling out that it's a woman. Feminism is about not calling out that it's a man. It's just a human being. In case you were curious, guys.
maybe we should maybe the future should have one gender. It will be a genderless future in the distant future. Mars will be a
On
genderless
Mars.
future will be populated by hermaphrodites. Well, anyways, on that note, I hope by that time common sense will be not just a word, but will be a rule to live by, or an instinct that's just innate in all of us. It should be actually by now, but like in everything else, there's good and bad. Things fail and things work, and hopefully, we can only hope for the best, and hopefully that things will pan out in the whole world well, with this pandemic happening and everything. So guys, it has been crazy. This internet is not in our favor, and but we soldiered on anyway, so I'm happy for that. Thank you everybody, and hope to see you guys again next week. You can watch us. Our replays are in the nuts in our nuts page, and join our nuts group for more crazy conversations. We can talk about everything there, and I'll post more about this topic on that group. So please stay safe, stay healthy, and have common sense all the time. Good night.